Welcome to Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff, where we interview newsmakers, storytellers, and all-around interesting people. Sit back, relax, unless you're driving, and enjoy the show. Here's Jackson.
Hello. I am Jackson Huff. This is Not in a Huff. Thanks so much for joining me today. Today I have Jeff Ryan on. Now, Jeff, he is an author. Wrote a couple interesting books. He's got 3 out so far. His first one is all about his 28-year journey hiking the Appalachian Trail with one of his friends. They did it incrementally, as they had time off. Really interesting. We learn about what it took to get that done. It's over 2,000 miles, and it's pretty easy to see why it took 28 years to accomplish. Second book is all about the Appalachian Trail, kind of the history behind it. It was started by 2 men. We're going to kind of dive into that as well, just a brief history lesson. So we're going to talk about the trail. We're going to talk about the history of the trail. And then we're going to talk about his third book as well, which is called Hermit. We don't give away a lot of details in it, but basically there's a gentleman who back in the 1930s was kind of a hermit out in the cabin in Maine and ran, a secret life doing some very interesting things. So really enjoyed speaking with Mr. Ryan today. Going to talk a lot about hiking the Appalachian Trail, him and his 1985 Volkswagen van. Just a cool guy and a really interesting conversation that I don't really have a lot. It's not something that I've done very much hiking, so I really enjoyed learning about the Appalachian Trail and just the enormity of it and the kind of how it was created. He also tells us, for people who are interested in writing a book themselves, kind of the process and some tips there. So some hiking tips, some author tips, some really interesting stories about himself and some drug smuggling hermits. So a little bit of something for everyone today, and hope you enjoy it. Without further ado, here is my interview with Jeffrey Ryan. I am here today with Jeffrey Ryan. Jeffrey, how are you?
I am awesome. How about you?
I'm doing well. Well, thanks so much for agreeing to join me. I really appreciate it.
You bet.
Great. So obviously we're going to talk a lot about, your books and being an author, but before we get to that, if we could just tell us a little bit about yourself outside of, these topics that you're probably most passionate about, but tell us just a little bit more about you.
Sure. I grew up in the suburban Portland, Maine area, relatively rural when I grew up, and enjoyed a childhood with lots of time on the ocean and with my parents exploring the coast, and that and an interest in the woods and sort of area behind my home. I used to go exploring a lot as a kid, and it just kind of kept going from there, and planted a pretty strong seed in outdoor pursuits at a young age that I've continued to follow well into my adult years. So it's been a really wild ride, and it just continues to grow and go.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So I know one of your first books kind of talks about, being a person of the outdoors. So I want to touch on that here in a minute. But if we could, given that you've written quite a few books, at least 3, what inspired you to be an author?
Well, I think in addition to being enamored with the outdoors, I've always had a gift for storytelling and an interest in storytelling. And in fact, my professional career for many years, decades, as a matter of fact, was in marketing, where I was describing products and companies' products and services, which is basically storytelling. And so I made a living doing storytelling, but it wasn't sort of the author kind of storytelling. So I had an epiphany about 25, 30 years into my career where I just woke up one morning and said, you know what? I've been telling other people's stories my entire life, but it's really time to kind of turn the page metaphorically and tell my own stories. So I felt like, as all writers need to get to a point where they finally feel like they have something worth talking about, I decided to tell some stories about my outdoor exploits, and that catapulted me into book writing, and it's been really fun.
Yeah. So, I've talked to several authors before, but they've written maybe one book that they're, about something that they're passionate about, and it's not necessarily their career. So have you made a career of it now?
I have. I'm about 90% on the author circuit, which I wrote my first book between 2014 and 2016, and then took off in a 1985 Volkswagen van and toured the country and did a book tour. Wrote my second book while that tour was going on, or at least started the first half of it. Finished that book and continued touring, and that led to the third book, and it just keeps on going. The stories have a thread that just keeps pulling me along and opening new doors and sort of piquing my interest in other areas. And so it goes. I need a new engine in the Volkswagen, and once I get that pit stop done, I'm going to keep going again.
Awesome.
Once we get over the COVID hurdle and back to some semblance of normalcy, I look forward to exploring and being back on the road again.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about that. But since you brought it up now, I mean, what made you decide, a 1985 Volkswagen van, that's going to be, that's what's going to take me through my travels?
It was the perfect vehicle for me because basically it's hiking on wheels. It's my office, it's my bedroom, it's my mode of transportation, and it's actually, in some ways, it's my advertising. I have a book cover that I continually update on the back of the van, and I could talk a whole hour on bizarre places I've sold books. New Jersey gas pumps on the New Jersey Turnpike, scenic overlooks, rest areas, restaurants, and it's great. I mean, I love meeting people, and it's a conversation starter. And so, yeah, the vehicle is really perfect. I have a 2-burner stove, a refrigerator that's operates off a solar panel on the back of it, and I can fire up my my electronic equipment and keep that all charged, and it just is the perfect vehicle for me.
So when you're traveling around and promoting those books, you're talking about having a stove and a refrigerator. I assume that you're parking this places and actually sleeping in it as well then.
Oh yes, I camp most of the time. About once a week, I'll stay in a hotel, stop and do my laundry, and get caught up on Sports Center and that kind of stuff, and sleep in a bed. But I have 2 beds in the van. One, the top pops up and becomes basically a tent. But if I need to sleep downstairs at a place, on my way from here to there, I'll do that too, at a rest area or campground or whatever. So it's been a fun life. It's been really cool.
You mentioned COVID. How is that affecting it? Are you still able to spend any time in that van? I know that you said that it's getting some repair work, but.
Well, it will be. I took one trip the beginning of October. I actually went out to northern Minnesota to shoot some video for a project I'm working on about the fellow who was responsible for the Boundary Waters Wilderness Area, which is near and dear to my heart and my interests. And so I went out there to shoot some video before the leaves were down and while the foliage was still pretty nice. And then I came back to New England and went for a 50-mile hike with my hiking buddy, Wayne, who the first book is about an adventure I did with him over 28 years. And so we're continuing to hike. And now I'm kind of hunkered down in Maine. How it's affected me has been pretty dramatic, as with most people. But I've been able to do quite a few lectures and podcasts and that kind of thing. We've all had to be a little more nimble that way. I found it ironic. I had scheduled with LL Bean, the outdoor company, headquartered in Freeport, Maine. I had set up a lecture with them almost 2 years in advance, and it ended up being 2 days before they shut the store down because of COVID. So I was really fortunate. I had 170 people show up for that lecture, and it was really a great evening. And boom, 2 days later, the world changed. So I was very fortunate that way, timing wise. But I've done a few podcasts, and I actually did a documentary film debut with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on a Zoom presentation that they did in the fall. So, it's like hiking, camping, traveling. We have to be nimble and sort of take what's in front of us. And flat tires happen and rainstorms happen, and you just kind of go with the flow and figure out how to put the next foot forward. So I was kind of prepared mentally that way, I guess.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I've not really thought about that. Your experience in the wilderness and kind of having to take what comes at you kind of helps you prepare for this as well. So you did mention your buddy, your hiking buddy, and the Appalachian Trail, and the book that you wrote on that in your 28-year journey. If you would just tell us a little bit first, for people who don't even know what the Appalachian Trail is, what that is, and a little bit about what that first book's about.
Sure. The Appalachian Trail is really the granddaddy of, the near granddaddy of long distance trails. It is the granddaddy of multi-state trails. The only distance trail, hiking trail that precedes it in the United States was the Long Trail in Vermont, which goes the length of Vermont from the Massachusetts border to Canada, which was established in 1910. But in 1921, a guy named Benton Mackay came up with this idea for a multi-state hiking trail, originally conceived to go from Tennessee to New Hampshire, but ended up going from just north of Atlanta, Georgia, to north central Maine. And so it's about 2,100 miles long, covers 14 states. The shortest one is West Virginia at about 3 miles. And the longest one is Virginia at about 540 miles, if I remember correctly off the top of my head. But anyway, it's one of those sort of bucket list things to do the whole thing. And when I was 26, I turned 27 on a trail called the Pacific Crest Trail that goes from Mexico to Canada. And two friends and I did that over a six-month period. So I got back from that, and I kind of needed to hunker down and get a job. It wasn't likely I was going to be able to escape for a 6-month trip anytime soon. But I started hiking on the Appalachian Trail with my friend Wayne Sear. And when we first started doing it, we just did it to go out and do some hiking. What we didn't realize for a few years is that we were actually doing the whole Appalachian Trail, or at least had started it. And so we just said, hey, let's just keep going. Every year we'll pick a different section, and let's do part of Pennsylvania, let's do New Jersey, let's do part of Maryland, et cetera, et cetera. So we just kept going. It took us 28 years to finish the whole thing, and we just kept going till we were done. About 5 years to go in that quest was really when we first started joking about it on the trail that, man, if there was ever a book, we should talk about this or remember this trip or whatever. And it sort of became a talking point among us. And then, as I said, after we finished the trail, just decided to sit down and basically start plugging away at writing the chapters. And it turned into Appalachian Odyssey, a 28-year hike on America's Trail. And so that was the first book, and it's loaded with color pictures and maps, and it's kind of a nice, I think, combination of travel log and a little bit of history of the trail and the areas that it goes through and the different terrain and the different mental challenges, etc. And fun book. It's been very, very well received. And my proudest thing about that book, which I intentionally did, was kind of planted a seed with people that you can do really big things in your lifetime incrementally, that you don't have to make a big leap and, cash in the 401k or quit your job or whatever. In fact, I didn't. That you can just keep poking away at something, and one day you turn a corner and you've pulled it off, whether it's a career change or hiking a 2,000-mile trail or whatever it may be. I think that's an important consideration for people to have in everyday life. It comes up, and I think sometimes we set ourselves up for an either or scenario when, in fact, you can build a bridge from here to there. It's been really fun going around doing the lectures and talks, because several folks have come up to me afterwards and said, "Oh my God, I always wanted to do the Appalachian Trail. It never dawned on me to do it in sections. So thank you." And, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, no, that really is a cool thing. The incremental nature of it. Obviously, the whole trail is just one step at a time. So if you would tell us a little bit, you talk about you did it in increments. What was a typical day? Obviously, when you took these trips, did you normally say, we're trying to do 100 miles on this trip, or how did that work?
It was interesting. So the first thing was, how much time could either one of us get off that year or that season or whenever we were doing it. So the second factor was, given the amount of time we have, how much travel time are we going to use on either end, and then how many days do we have left? So there were a lot of sort of dynamics there. The other thing is that once we got out of New England, we stopped using our own vehicles and took public transportation to get there. So we cobbled together train, bus, taxi. This was pre-Uber days. And there are people who will shuttle you from those places. There's a list of people who will shuttle you from the bus station to the trail and drop you off and then pick you up at the other end, take you back to public transportation again. So it really varied. Sometimes we were out for 10 days and we hiked 9, and sometimes we were out for 17 days and hiked 14. But it basically averaged out at about 10 days a year, 10 to 12 days a trip. And then we'd try to figure out what our mileage would be to get from point A to B, where a logical place to get off the trail would be.
Gotcha. So just a little bit about the trail. When it comes to actually hiking, is it a strenuous trail? Is it tough, or?
It is. It's, Bill Bryson wrote a wonderful book about the trail. It's more of a comedy than anything. And there was a movie made about it with Nick Nolte and Robert Redford. The movie is not as good as the book, quite frankly, but it's called A Walk in the Woods, and it's a bit of a misnomer. It's actually not even a bit of a misnomer. It's just plain a misnomer. It's a mountain trail, and so therefore you're going up and down hills a lot. There are places where it's less strenuous, but by and large, you're schlepping a pack up and over hills the whole length of the thing. Certainly, the hills are higher in the Smokies and higher in northern New England and lower everywhere in between, but it's still a mental and physical challenge on a daily basis, sometimes on an hourly basis. It's 1,000% fantastic. People ask me what my favorite spot is, and I can't tell you. To me, it's all great. Just being on a 3-foot path, walking in the woods is one of the most wonderful avocations I can think of. It's you're leaving everything behind. You're basically carrying your world on your back, and you're free to think great thoughts or think about absolutely nothing at all. And you're just moving at 3 miles an hour, which most of us don't get to do very often. We're usually going about 75, either in actuality or in our brain. And it's just nice to be able to really slow down and see things, feel things, and learn a lot about yourself, quite frankly.
You talk about learning about yourself. You were talking about, doing it with your friend and coordinating days and time. Did you do the entire thing with your friends? So there was never times that one of you couldn't get off and somebody else did a little portion of it?
Nope, we did the whole thing, the two of us together. And I will say it's interesting that way, because there's a phrase, hike your own hike. And it's really interesting because we have different paces. I'm actually a bit faster than he is. And there's this innate sense of, we never hike on each other's heels. We would predetermine logical meeting spots, or because I was ahead, I would come to a viewpoint or a logical stop, like, here's a water source. We should probably both stop and make sure we are in a good situation water-wise, or check and see where the next water source is. So there are logical places to stop. And also, I just have this innate sense of when I'm about 20 minutes ahead of him, which equates to about a mile, and I would just stop and wait. And I talk about it in the book. What's interesting about hiking with somebody is it's not like you're driving with someone and they're in the front seat and you're never away from them and you're in this capsule hurtling down the road. It's you're hiking, you're feeling about your mental and physical capacity, kind of checking in with yourself, very much aware and responsible enough to know that there's someone with you. But it's sort of like two people in two separate kayaks going down through whitewater. You're not going the same place. You're meeting up down the river, but you're traveling the journey together. Is the best analogy I can make for it. But it's really fun that way, because if you need mental space and you need physical space, you get it, and then you pull together for things that you do together, like cook and figure out logistics for the next day, or we'd listen to a ball game on the radio at night sometimes, more often than not, or catch a forecast or listen to some music or something. So it's communal and non-communal at the same time. It's a neat pastime, I think, that way. So
you guys would be camping on the trail.
Oh yeah.
Gotcha. So
in fact, we tried to. It was a running gag because of the way we were doing it, section hiking. A lot of people who are through hiking will frequently get off to get resupplied or grab a burger and a beer somewhere, and their time is more flexible that way, or do laundry or whatever. Take a day off to rest and relax. For us on the section hike, it was really, we took everything we had food-wise that we would need for the week and just went. And that way we didn't take a lot of detours off the trail. The running gag became, if there was a cheeseburger within a mile and a half of the trail, we'd probably jump off and have someone else cook for a change. But other than that, we basically stayed with what we had and camped along the way the whole time.
Gotcha. So one more trail specific question. Obviously it's a 2,000-mile trail, like you mentioned. And other, I guess, famous long distance things have kind of changed. So my question is it still, I guess, well put together where you know exactly where you're going the whole time? Like, for instance, I've talked to people that's driven Route 66, and it's just a mess all over the place now. And this is Route 66, and this is Route 66. So the question is there just truly one Appalachian Trail, or sometimes you got to figure out where you're going?
That's a great question. It's truly one trail. The purists will say that they have to walk every step of the blazed path, so that the typical trail marker is a white. They call it a blaze. It's literally a paint mark on a tree, 2 inches by 6 inches, and it's a single white blaze. They call it white blazing it. And you look for a white blaze up ahead and looked for the next one and the next one. It's also well used. More than, I think the last time I read a stat was upwards of 3 million people hike at least a mile of the Appalachian Trail every year. So with that much foot traffic on it, the path itself is fairly well marked.
Yeah.
Just from sheer use.
Yeah. So I guess the next question would be about advice you would give to others who are, wanting to hike, whether it's the Appalachian Trail or just the trail in their, that runs from their backyard.
The greatest advice I can give, and I get asked this a lot. Part of it is the equipment side, and part of it is the mental/physical side. Talk about the physical side, mental side first. It's funny, I was talking to a childhood friend about this the other day. He said, there's nothing in the gym that can prepare you for hiking. I said, you're right. It's important to consider, if you can, getting into aerobic shape, no matter how you do it. I think it's important from a stamina perspective, but he's absolutely right. And I've also said this for years, is that it's almost impossible to emulate the way your muscles move when you're on the trail, because you're stepping on roots and rocks and your muscles are moving in different directions than anything you can ever emulate on a stair climber or an elliptical trainer or anything like that. So you need to be prepared for that, and the only way to do it is just to do it. Start incrementally. Don't try to set the world on fire. Do something realistic. Do an out and back of a couple miles or whatever. And then from an equipment side of things, I tell people to buy equipment or borrow equipment to learn what your best choices are, because they change. I mean, they're different for different individuals. Some people will want a warmer bag. Some people sleep hot, so they don't need as much sleeping bag, that kind of thing. But also, just when you buy a tent, for example, or a flashlight, a headlamp, any of that stuff, get used to setting it up and taking it down and turning the light on and off in the dark, because that's generally what you're going to be doing before you go out in the woods and it gets dark and it's like, oh, damn, I have to set this tent up. I've never even read the instructions and it's about to pour. That's not what you want. So I tell people, keep it short, keep it real, go out and enjoy yourself. Who cares if you get to the campsite at 3 p.m? It's not a competition. Just get used to your gear, enjoy the setting, take a book out, whatever.
Yeah, what you said about, making sure that the stuff that you have, how to use and put up in the dark is huge. I haven't camped a ton, to be honest with you, but every time I bought a tent, I've tried to put it up in my backyard or something like that to make sure I know how to put it up. Of course, you put it up during the day, and then when it's time to put up the tent, it's dark. I can't see what I'm doing. This is not at all like I simulated in my backyard. So yeah, I think that's huge. I guess it just is a no-brainer. Let's try it in the dark, but that's something that I've not learned yet. So
it's funny because for us it's so choreographed now. I carry the poles and the tent fly, and Wayne carries the tent body. And when we find a spot to camp and agree that hey, that's a flat spot with a nice exposure and this and that, it's literally up in under 5 minutes, and we're throwing our gear inside, and you just get used to it. It's second nature. But boy, it's a good skill to have when the thunderstorm is imminent and you're in the tent and you're dry and it's pouring out, and you say, my God, that's a lot better than standing out there in the wind trying to figure out how the poles thread through the sleeves or all that stuff. If you haven't done it before, it's like, why put yourself through it?
So, if you would, let's talk a little bit about your second book. I believe it's
Sure.
about the Appalachian Trail as well, but just maybe the history behind it.
It is. I mentioned Benton MacKaye coming up with the idea for the trail. So when I wrote Appalachian Odyssey, I think anyone who hikes the AT thinks, especially given the fact that it was really this brainchild almost out of nowhere, it would seem. How did this thing come into fruition, and how did this thing get built during the Great Depression when people were rubbing pennies together? How did this thing even come into being? And so I've always been interested in that, and there were some urban legends around the personalities of the two people, the Ben MacKaye, who came up with the idea, and Myron Avery, who was a Maine native who built the whole thing practically by himself, willed the thing into existence and commandeered people to join him in building it, and basically built the whole trail between 1928, 29 to 1938, so 10 years, quite a phenomenal feat. At the end of it, they had a big falling out, a very public falling out, and never spoke to each other again for the rest of their lives, because of difference in philosophy about the trail. And so I was interested in that and followed the path of that, and wrote that book. And I was working on Blazing Ahead. The full title was Blazing Ahead, Benton MacKaye, Myron Avery, and the Rivalry That Built the Appalachian Trail. So I was in an office building in Portland, Maine, not far from where I'm sitting right now. And an evening like tonight, it was actually a little later in the winter, and a guy came in, and I was the only one in the office. As was usually the case, everyone would go home and I'd be working on my book. He said, "I got to ask you what you're doing here," because he was there to vacuum out the office. And I said, "I'm working on this book about the Appalachian Trail." And his eyes got huge, and he said, "Oh my God, have I got something for you?" And I said, "Really? What's that?" And he said, "I'll see you next week." So he comes in the following week, and he hands me a 1934 guidebook to the Appalachian Trail in Maine that had been written by Myron Avery. And so before he had even left, he said, I found this in a yard sale for $5. It was meant to be, you can have it. So I'm flipping through the book, and I found this mention by Myron Avery of a side trail in Monson, Maine, way in 100 miles south of the northern terminus of the trail. And he said, "I cut a Blue Blaze side trail to a hermit's cabin, and the hermit lived a secret life and was notorious. And there was an article about him in the 1934 Boston Herald." He gave the name of the article, "The Secret of Jim White and His Woodland Lookout," by Roland J. Sawyer Jr. And so I thought, man, I got to find this article, right? So next thing I know, I'm trying to chase down this article, and a friend of mine who's a historian said, "Here's something you might want to try." And she sent me this link to the Library of Congress, some really esoteric research department. It's not high level on the webpage there. You have to really dig. So I figured I'll give it a shot. So I sent an email to the Library of Congress figuring it's going to get stuck somewhere in the pipe. So I just said, do you guys by any chance have this article, The Legend of Jim White and His Woodland Lookout, Roland Sawyer, blah, blah, blah. 15 minutes later, I get an email back from the Library of Congress. This is a true story. And the subject line is, "Your tax dollars at work." So I open the thing, and the guy says, "I can't believe this. We have 4 articles from the 1930s that are digitized from the Boston Herald, and yours is one of them. Here it is." So I open this article, and it's basically a synopsis of this guy's life. And it was beyond fascinating. So I just said, "Oh my God, I've got to call the Monson Historical Society now." So I called them, and I said, "Have you ever heard about a guy named Jim White?" And the guy just started chuckling, and he said, "I think you need to get up here. We got a big file on Jim White." So long story short, I went up to Monson and found out all this stuff about this guy who was born in New York City in the 1850s, ran away from home at age 16, joined the German Navy in 1860, what would it have been? 1872, and became a world traveler for 16 more years, came back at age 34, the equivalent of a millionaire, and moved up to Maine to live in a cabin and talk to as few people as possible for the next 40 years, and run a secret life, sneaking down to New York to quote unquote visit his mother when he was actually running a smuggling ring. So anyway, I fell into this whole story because of my research into the Appalachian Trail, and that became my latest book called Hermit, The Mysterious Life of Jim White.
I guess the hardest question that maybe you have to answer, and maybe it'll be the easiest one, is which of your books, if people are listening to this and be like, really like this guy, I want to pick up a book, which one would you recommend people pick up? Of course, they should pick up all three, but which one do you think kind of encapsulates things better?
I'm not going to go there because I'll tell you, it's really interesting. There are three different flavors, first of all. The first one's really a travel log, and it's a story of friendship. It's a story of perseverance. It's also just a fun read about, it's basically 28 short stories, I would say, about doing the trail and ultimately prevailing, doing the whole thing. The second one is really a straight historical account of how the trail was devised and built, which is going to have interest with a slightly different audience. It's really sort of a snapshot in time in the 1920s and 30s, and how this thing came into being against all odds, against some of the stuff that was going on in the country, particularly economically, but also the rise of the automobile was threatening public lands to a degree that nobody had imagined, and fighting for the corridor to have the trail at all and have it not be overrun by too many roads was a challenge for them. So that's a different thing. The Hermit book is more of it's a historical fiction. I created some of the characters to help bridge the story because there were some missing pieces. It's, as I tell people, it's about 85% factual account of Jim White's life, but I needed some fictional characters to carry the thing through, and people enjoy that just because it's an entertaining story rooted in reality, but fictional characters too. So it's really pick a flavor. It's, chocolate, vanilla, or strawberry, right? Really, it's three different things.
No, I really didn't expect you to pick. So I think what you did was the best, just kind of a brief synopsis of all of them. And I think they all sound like, something that a lot of people will be interested in. So do you, I mean, it sounds like you still pretty much just write what you're passionate about. So, I guess with some authors, they do, have all these deadlines, which sometimes makes it a chore at that point. Do you still pretty much kind of get to work at your own pace and do things as you please?
Yeah, it's funny. The way I tend to work, I don't think it's terribly unusual, but for me, it's not so much an outline. I don't start with an outline. I start with collecting knowledge. And I just get to this point where I feel like, okay, I finally feel like I've absorbed enough for me to sit down and start writing. So I start writing, and I see where the story is taking me to a degree. my approach is more like throwing clay on a potter's wheel and sort of shaping it, as opposed to having a fixed outline and thinking it through. And there's certainly advantages to writing both ways. But what I found out with Hermit was I had such a great story and I had so much fun telling it that I just couldn't wait to get up every day and see where this story was going. I knew the characters. I kind of envisioned how they would interact with each other, and I just allowed them to kind of take me on the trip. Whereas Appalachian Odyssey was more about, I knew each trip, and I knew each trip had a theme, because that's the way, and any of us who have ever traveled anywhere know that within the first couple days, it seems like there's a recurring theme that's happening on that trip. And so that one kind of had a different structure to it that way. I'm hoping that my next book will be as easy and as pleasurable to write as Hermit was, because there's a tension and an energy that's in that book that I kind of found the secret formula that made me want to get up and really wordsmith it every day. And I'm kind of waiting for that to happen.
Yeah. So you gave us some advice about hiking. Now, as an author, what advice do you have to someone who has a story to tell, but they're just not exactly sure how to do it?
It's sort of like hiking. I would say there's nothing like just doing it. One of the traps that I think a lot of aspiring authors fall into is listening to too much advice and having the advice keep them from actually doing the craft. And so I try to advise people that there's nothing better than doing work and putting it out into the world. It helps you build confidence, and it may be in the old days, they would say, get a job writing for the local newspaper and doing articles and just get used to having your name on something and putting it out. I think in today's environment, it's a lot easier to become a writer, which has made becoming a writer so much more attainable. The problem with that is there's so many other people writing that it's hard to break through, and it's hard to establish yourself. The quality of your work may not show itself for a while, just because people have to go through a lot to find you. That being said, there's nothing like getting serious about your craft and making a commitment to yourself to do it. Just like doing the 28-year hike, right? It's like you don't get there by wishing it, you get there by walking it. And that's the big lesson for me. And the other one was certainly pre-COVID, but it's the mentality I still have, which is get out into the world and tell people that you have a story. And COVID has made that a little more difficult in some ways, but then again, I'm here with you tonight, right? So it's a different way to think about getting the word out, but there's certainly ways to do it. But my number one advice is just, sit at the keyboard and see what happens.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. And I like kind of comparing it to hiking. I mean, obviously, when people think about going and hiking, and they think of this 2,000-mile trail, which sounds almost impossible. You've got to take it one step at a time. The same thing with writing a book. Obviously, if you sit down thinking, okay, I've got to write a 300-page book, that probably is a little bit scary, and that stops a lot of people from doing it, I'm sure. So, but those 300 pages comes one word, one page at a time. So I like that correlation.
The other thing is just a real quick thing that made me think of that is when I wrote Appalachian Odyssey, there was a little bit of that, oh my God, how am I going to write this whole book? It certainly happened. But what was funny was I started in the middle. I just said, I'm going to pick a trip and I'm going to write about it. It doesn't have to be the first one. It just has to be one. Yeah. I've got 28 to write. So I picked one, and I had a lot of fun writing. It was actually, what was interesting was I chose the one that was mentally mentally and physically, the almost breaking point for me. It was the only time it's ever happened. And that's the one I picked. And then once I did that one, then all the rest of them just sort of fell into place. And I just had this mentality of, okay, I put little dots on every time I completed a chapter, I had cards on the wall, and I put a red dot on each one when it was done, so I could visually see that I was making progress.
Yeah, I like that.
It's not buried on the computer. It's, oh yeah, I'm halfway there now.
Right. No, I like that kind of just starting somewhere. I've heard that too. People talk about, I have a story to tell, but I just don't know how to start it. I've heard someone tell an author that, and the author said, well, then don't figure out how to start it. Write a chapter right in the middle. So you don't necessarily have to start at the beginning. So I like that. So I want to be kind of cognizant of your time here. I got two more questions for you. One of them is, you've talked about the Appalachian Trail and kind of making sure that the public lands stay available and the roads and all that kind of stuff. Do you feel hopeful now that the Appalachian Trail is something that's going to be preserved and is here to stay?
I do. I feel really good about the AT because a variety of things. One is the model for protecting and maintaining the trail from the close to the beginning was the idea of having individual clubs maintain it. And there's been a private and public component to that. So the clubs maintain in the private lands, and to a certain degree the public lands. There's a partnership with the Forest Service, the Park Service, and the maintaining clubs that's been really strong, and it's actually been replicated by many, in fact most of the trail systems that exist. There are 11 other national scenic trails, and they've all embraced this model. I mean, who better to advocate for and protect the trail than the people who live near it, right? So that's been really good, and I'm very hopeful of that. It's powerful, and it's a good model. It's a successful model.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned earlier, somebody listens to this, thinks this is something I'm really interested in. I want to hear more about one or all of your books. How are they going to find your books, and how are they going to connect with you as a whole?
Yeah, just go to jeffryanauthor.com. And I also wanted to mention, I have a whole bunch of advice there about how to section hike the trail, how to choose hiking boots, some of, why hiking poles are important. I actually have a little book about getting started hiking called A Hike in the Woods, which is available as a Kindle and as a print version. So that might be of interest to people. My top 10 blogs are listed there. And, that's a good place to start. All my books are there too. So jeffryanauthor.com.
I'll tell you, I've really, really appreciated your time. It's been a really insightful conversation.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and glad I could be on board. Thanks for reaching out.
Absolutely. And that was my interview with Jeffrey Ryan. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope you learned something, whether it is just being entertained by his stories of the trail, maybe about the history of the trail. I really enjoyed speaking with him. I didn't know very much of anything about the Appalachian Trail, so I really, really appreciated his time. Do go check out his books. Like he mentioned, there's 3 very different flavors, whether you're into history, whether you're into a story of friendship, or whether, hey, you just want to read an entertaining story about a drug smuggling hermit. A little bit of something for everyone. So I do hope one of those interests you and you check it out. Thanks so much for joining me this week. Appreciate you being here. Hope to see you next time, and take it away, Chris.
This has been Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff. Thank you for listening. Be sure to join us next time, where we will interview another amazing guest who is sure to make you laugh or make you think. Or, hey, maybe even both. But until then, keep being awesome.